Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going into the heart of ancient Africa, ancient Egypt, and we are solving a mystery that has haunted historians, archaeologists, and scientists for over a century. A boy became the most powerful man on Earth at age 9. He was dead by 18. And 3,000 years later, we still do not know exactly why. Today we are talking about King Tutankhamun, his life, his reign, and the cold case surrounding his death that modern science is still trying to crack. Was it an accident, a disease, or was the most famous pharaoh in history murdered inside his own palace? Let's get into it. Act 1. The boy who inherited the world. Imagine waking up one morning and being told you are a god, not a king, not a ruler, a god, living flesh, the embodiment of Horus on earth, the keeper of the Nile, the master of the sun and the stars, and every grain of wheat grown between the deserts. You are 9 years old. This is the reality that Tutankhamun stepped into around 1332 BC, when he was placed on the throne of ancient Egypt following the death of his father. A pharaoh so controversial, so hated by the establishment, that his own name would later be chiseled off every wall in the kingdom. To understand King Tut, you first have to understand what he inherited. Because Tutankhamun did not inherit a stable empire at its peak, he inherited a kingdom in crisis, a civilization in the middle of a collision between a radical new religion and the entire weight of Egyptian tradition. His father was Akhenaten, and Akhenaten had done something that no pharaoh before him had dared. He had looked at the entire Egyptian religious system, its hundreds of gods, its powerful priesthoods, its thousands of years of ritual and tradition, and thrown it all out. Akhenaten declared there was only one god, the Aten, the sun disk, and that he, Akhenaten, was the sole intermediary between humanity and that god. The priests were stripped of their power, the temples were closed, the old gods, Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, were forbidden, statues were defaced, offerings stopped. An entire culture that had existed for over 1,000 years was dismantled in a single reign. When Akhenaten died, he left behind a kingdom seething with resentment, a priesthood hungry for revenge, and a 9-year-old boy sitting on the most dangerous throne in the ancient world. That boy was Tutankhamun. His original name, given at birth, was Tutankhaten, meaning living image of the Aten. One of his first acts as pharaoh, almost certainly guided by his advisors, was to change it. Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. A signal to the whole country. The old gods were back. The revolution was over. Come home. His short reign was spent reversing his father's reforms, reopening temples, reinstating priests, and restoring the name of Amun to every monument in Egypt. It was, in political terms, one of the most significant reversals in Egyptian history, and it was being executed by a child. But who was actually running Egypt while the child pharaoh learned to walk the corridors of power? 2 men, and both of them will become suspects before this story is over. The first was I, the Grand Vizier, the most powerful official in the Egyptian state, responsible for day-to-day administration of the entire kingdom. I was old, experienced, and calculating. He had served under Akhenaten and somehow survived the transition. He knew where every lever of power sat, and he had no son of his own to inherit what he was building. The second was Horemheb, the general, commander of the Egyptian army, the most feared military force in the ancient world. Horemheb was ambitious, disciplined, and deeply conservative, a man who believed in Egyptian tradition and resented the chaos that Akhenaten's revolution had caused. He was also, in terms of pure military power, the most dangerous man in the kingdom. Both men would later become pharaohs themselves. That detail is hard to ignore. Tutankhamun grew up surrounded by these two men, advised by them, managed by them, shaped by them. His was a reign that began in the shadow of his father's catastrophic legacy and was spent trying to undo it, while two powerful men watched and waited. He would be dead within 9 years. Act 2. The Body in the Tomb. On November 4th, 1922, a young water boy working for British archaeologist Howard Carter was digging in the sand of the Valley of the Kings near Luxor when his stick hit something hard. A step, carved into rock, then another, and another. What Carter's team uncovered over the following days was a sealed doorway bearing the cartouche, the royal stamp, of Tutankhamun, a tomb that had been hidden for over 3,000 years, packed with more than 5,000 artifacts, was about to be opened to the modern world. Carter described peering through a small hole into the antechamber by candlelight, the shadows retreating to reveal gold glinting everywhere he looked. When his sponsor Lord Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, Carter reportedly replied, "Yes, wonderful things." What they eventually found inside the burial chamber stopped everyone cold. The mummy of Tutankhamun lay inside 3 nested coffins, the innermost made of solid gold, enclosed within a stone sarcophagus, surrounded by 4 gilded wooden shrines filling the entire burial chamber. The walls were painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead. Jars of wine and food were stacked for the afterlife. A solid gold death mask, arguably the most recognizable artifact in human history, covered the young king's face. He had been buried like a god, entombed with the riches of an empire. And yet something was wrong with this tomb from the moment scientists began to study it. The tomb was small, far too small for a pharaoh. The Valley of the Kings was full of grand royal tombs, cut deep into the limestone, with long corridors and vast burial chambers. Tutankhamun's was cramped, irregular, clearly built in a hurry. Some of the paint on the walls was still damp when the tomb was sealed. The tomb was not originally built for Tutankhamun at all. It had been prepared for Ai, his own Grand Vizier. The king had died so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that there was no time to prepare a proper royal burial site. Someone had to improvise. And that someone was Ai, who gave the king his own pre-built tomb, or the king he had just killed. Because this is where the cold case begins. A pharaoh dead at 18, a rushed burial, a tomb that was not his, and 2 powerful men waiting in the wings, both of whom would become pharaoh within years of his death. Let's look at the body. Act 3. The evidence. When scientists first had serious access to Tutankhamun's mummy, the picture they assembled was troubling, not because of what was obvious, but because of what was hidden. A 1968 X-ray revealed what appeared to be a bone fragment loose inside the skull. For decades, this was the centerpiece of the murder theory. Renowned Egyptologist Robert Breyer argued that the bone fragment was consistent with a fatal blow to the back of the head, that someone had crept up behind the young pharaoh and ended his life with a single strike. It was dramatic. It fit the story of palace intrigue perfectly. But in 2005, a team of scientists subjected the mummy to the most detailed CT scan it had ever received. Over 1,700 cross-sectional images of every bone and tissue. And the murder theory started to fall apart. The damage to the skull, it turned out, looked far more consistent with the mummification process itself than with a blow to the head. Bone fragments shift after death. They can be dislodged during embalming. They can be moved by the hands of archaeologists who, as Howard Carter's team did, handled the mummy with some roughness in the 1920s. The blow to the head theory's most dramatic piece of evidence had crumbled, but the CT scan revealed something else entirely, something that opened a different and more complicated chapter in the mystery. Tutankhamun's left leg was fractured, severely, a break so significant that the bone had begun to show early signs of healing, meaning it happened shortly before death, not during the mummification process. Combined with this, the scan revealed severe necrosis, bone death, in his left foot, consistent with a rare condition called Köhler disease 2, which restricts blood flow to the bones of the foot. Over 130 walking canes were found in his tomb. A teenage pharaoh, the most powerful man in the ancient world, could barely walk without assistance. This changes everything about how we picture him. Not the athletic warrior king of Egyptian propaganda riding his chariot into battle. A young man in constant pain. A young man who struggled to stand. A young man whose body was failing him before he ever reached 20. So what killed him? The leg, the foot, something else entirely. Then came the DNA. Act 4. What the DNA said. In 2010, and again with updated findings published in 2025, researchers from the National Research Center in Cairo, working alongside German DNA specialists, extracted genetic material from Tutankhamun's mummy and compared it against other royal mummies from the same period. The results were extraordinary. The DNA showed evidence of repeated infections by Plasmodium falciparum, the most deadly strain of malaria. Not once, multiple times, in the ancient world, without antibiotics, without quinine, without any of the treatments we take for granted today, repeated malaria infections would have systematically dismantled the immune system, attacked the organs, and made every other condition in the body dramatically worse. The DNA analysis also confirmed what many had long suspected about Tutankhamun's parentage, that his parents were closely related, almost certainly siblings. This was not unusual in the Egyptian royal family. For centuries, pharaohs had married within the bloodline to keep the divine inheritance pure. But the genetic cost was severe. Inbreeding compresses the immune system. It amplifies physical abnormalities. It creates exactly the kind of body that struggles to fight off infection. His grandparents were identified as Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, both of whom also showed evidence of malaria infection. The disease did not come from nowhere. It ran through the royal bloodline for generations. Tutankhamun was born into a family already weakened by the very thing that would eventually kill him, and his tomb contained what researchers have described as an afterlife pharmacy. Jars and boxes filled with medicinal compounds, herbs, resins, known for their healing properties. The ancient Egyptians believed the dead would need in the afterlife what they had needed in life. Whoever prepared Tutankhamun's tomb filled it with medicine. This was a young man who had been sick for a long time. So the scientific picture today is this: a young man with a fractured leg, a degenerative bone condition, an immune system weakened by generations of inbreeding, and repeated malaria infections, all hitting simultaneously. Each condition alone might have been survivable. Together, in a world with no modern medicine, they almost certainly were not. The official scientific consensus does not support murder. It supports the tragic convergence of multiple physical failures in a body that was never built to last. But the murder theory refuses to die, because the science of the body can only tell us so much. The evidence of the court tells a different story entirely. Act 5. The Suspects. Let us talk about what happened in the days and weeks after Tutankhamun died. Within a remarkably short period of time, I, the Grand Vizier, the man who had spent 9 years managing the boy king, stepped forward and declared himself Pharaoh. He did not wait for any formal process. He did not consult widely. He moved with the speed of a man who had been ready. And then he married Tutankhamun's widow. Ankhesenamun was Tutankhamun's wife, and also his half-sister, another consequence of the royal family's practice of close blood marriage. She was young, politically exposed, and suddenly widowed with no heir to protect her position. In the days after her husband's death, she did something extraordinary. She wrote a letter, not to an Egyptian official, not to Ai. She wrote to Suppiluliuma, the king of the Hittites, Egypt's great rival power to the north. She requested one of his sons as a husband. She said she refused to marry a servant. And she wrote words that have echoed through 3,000 years of history. I will not marry a servant of mine. I am afraid. A queen of Egypt admitting in writing that she was afraid of the men now surrounding her. The Hittite king was suspicious. A pharaoh's widow asking for a foreign husband was completely without precedent. He sent an envoy to verify the letter was genuine. Ankhesenamun confirmed it. He then sent one of his sons south toward Egypt. That prince never arrived. He was intercepted and killed on the road. By whom? History does not record with certainty. But the timing and the motive point directly to the men who stood to lose everything if a foreign prince sat on the Egyptian throne. After that, Ankhesenamun disappears from the historical record entirely. No more inscriptions, no more letters, no more trace of any kind. A woman who had been at the very center of Egyptian royal life for years simply vanished, almost certainly forced into the marriage with Ai, and then erased from history along with her husband. And then there is Horemheb, the general who waited. He did not take the throne immediately. He watched Ai rule for 4 years. He watched Ai die. And then he stepped forward. And once he had the throne, he did something that tells us everything about how he felt about the period that had just passed. He took a hammer and chisel to every record of Tutankhamun's existence. He ordered the systematic erasure of Tutankhamun from Egyptian history, the name chiseled from walls, the statues destroyed or repurposed, the tomb entrance buried under debris so thoroughly that it would not be found again for over 3,000 years. Horemheb did not want anyone to remember that Tutankhamun had existed. Why? If the boy king died simply of natural causes, a sick young man who ran out of time, why spend the resources erasing him? Why not absorb his reign into your own narrative, as Egyptian rulers often did? Why the deliberate, thorough destruction of every trace? Some historians argue that Horemheb was erasing the entire corrupted period, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ai together, a political and religious purge to reconnect Egypt to the legitimate line of pharaohs that preceded Akhenaten's revolution. It was about ideology, not personal guilt. Others are less generous. The verdict. So what actually killed King Tutankhamun? The honest answer is, we do not know for certain, and we may never know. What the science tells us is this: a young man with a broken leg, a degenerative bone disease, a compromised immune system, and repeated malaria infections almost certainly died from the combined weight of those conditions pressing down on a body that was already running out of time. Each one alone might have been survivable. Together, in the ancient world, they were likely not. What the history tells us is something murkier. Two powerful men with everything to gain sat beside him as he weakened. One married his widow within days of his death. The other spent his reign destroying the evidence that Tutankhamun had ever lived. A queen wrote a secret letter to a foreign king saying she was afraid, and then vanished from history entirely. The murder theory has no smoking spear, no confession, no physical evidence that survives modern forensic scrutiny. What remains is a collection of circumstances that feel deeply wrong, and a science that says a sick boy could have died without any help at all. Maybe I and Horemheb were opportunists, not killers, men who saw power becoming available and moved quickly to take it, the way powerful men have always done throughout history. Maybe Ankhesenamun's fear was grief and vulnerability, not knowledge of a crime. Maybe Tutankhamun simply died, a fragile young man whose body was never built to survive to old age. Or maybe the most famous pharaoh in history was murdered in his own palace, his death covered up, his widow silenced, his memory erased, and the people who did it were clever enough that 3,000 years of investigation cannot prove it. One golden mask, one cramped tomb hurriedly sealed in a single night, and a cold case that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to bury it. That is the story of Tutankhamun. If this episode opens something up for you, drop it in the comments. What do you think happened? And if you want to go deeper into the world of ancient Egypt, subscribe and stay with us, because we are just getting started.